Off we go. All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the first online property meet. I'm Rob Norton. About 2 months ago, it was just over 2 months ago, we did the last Croydon property meet with Susanna Cole and Sarah Point and Ryan. And they told us all about their sourcing businesses, and we had a terrific evening. At the end of it, they both said, we're going off. We're going to go and we're going to self-isolate, being nice and sensible people that they are. We're going to self-isolate in our offices, and that'll be that. You'll hear from us in due course. Well, a couple of weeks went on, and then, of course, the lockdown came in. So we're all self-isolating. And as we all know, it's been a changed world since then. The virus kicked in, as we know. Yes, lockdown is here. Coronavirus is here. So there we go. As I say, my name is Rob Norton. I have my lovely assistant, Jane Skinner, sitting there. Give us a wave, Jane. Say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Yeah.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Rob.
That's okay, Jane. We've got our speakers, Michael Primrose, Matt Baker, and Niall Scott, who are all sitting waiting in the bayance. So I'm going to just do a little presentation just to introduce myself. And you have to excuse me because it's the first time I've really used this Zoom, but hopefully it'll work. I'm just going to share my screen now. And there we go. There are my details. Should anybody actually want to contact me. Right then. Here we get there in a second. Come on, it's not working. Come on, not working. There we go. There we go. We're on. Right, so that's me. That's me and my lovely partner, Yvonne. She's in the background making tea and coffee and stuff for us. And been doing the Croydon property meet since 2017, and we go online tonight in May 2020. I'm from South London. I'm from Carshalton, Surrey, actually. I live in Great London now. Just a normal sort of bloke. Attended schools in South London and attended the University of Life. And I moved down to Hove, actually, and bought a flat. I was either going to buy a flat where I was living in Wallington, or I was going to buy a flat in Hove, but I always fancied going to the seaside. I like the sea. I've always loved it. And so off I went to Hove, bought a flat, which after a couple of years made some money and turned into a 4-bedroom house, which I started operating and letting rooms. I've always had, I was in the fire service, always had a part-time job, which a lot of fire people have. And I started off doing property maintenance, painting, decorating, removals and clearance and that sort of thing. There's a lovely picture of me covered in mess, coming out of a job. I did 32 years with it, ended up taking all sorts of exams and qualifications, which are absolutely no good to anyone outside. It's like being in the army and learning to drive a tank. And once you come outside, nobody wants a tank driver. As I say, I'd got involved with buying my first HMO and became a landlord and property investor. As it says, I like motorbikes. I was just talking about a motorbike a minute ago. I like travel and helping others, and generally all round nice chat. I had various other jobs. I had some right daft jobs. I was a milkman at one point. One summer season at Butlins, I think I fried about 100,000 fried eggs in a few months, and didn't eat a fried egg for, I think, about 10 years after that. What I do now is, as I say, I've got a few buy-to-lets. I'm no great big player, I'm no great expert. I just got a few properties, been in it quite a long time, so as I say, since 1985. This one here is in Brighton. Bought it for 34.5 grand, and it's worth about, I don't know, 550 D600 now, because I put the 5th bedroom in it last year. There's another picture of it coming up here. And as I say, now I finished. There you go, 20th of September 2019. I finished it. This is another one. This is a house up north. I'm actually considering selling it. So if anybody fancies a 4-bedroom terraced house up north, I've just put a new boiler in it. So if anybody fancies one of those, just let us know. Couple of refurb shots. A lot of this stuff we do ourselves. As I say, I was in the fire service. We're very practical people. We're able to do this sort of thing. We could build a city probably on the stuff that we know between us. And just moving on to the next picture is a flat in Carshalton, which I bought it 10 years ago. And another little project that we made, it was a garden flat with a garage. And what I did was it was a 2-bedroom garden flat with a garage. And what I did was, it's now got half a garage and it's 3 bedrooms. So that's another little project that we did. We do look to work with others. Hang on, the PowerPoint's not working. There it goes. Future plans. As we say there, increase deal flow, help others with projects, residential, commercial projects, all that sort of stuff. And have a go at building the new online property meet. I quite like the idea of that. I think it's a good one. I think it could be going somewhere. That time will tell on that one. If you want to work with us, these are the sort of things we are good at. These are the sort of things we do. And should anybody want to get in touch, there are my details. And I'll just leave it there for a minute in case anyone wants to take a photograph or something of it. But I'm contactable anyway, all over the place, so not a great problem. So I'm going to unshare my screen. And there we go. Back to there. Our next speaker is going to be Michael Primrose. Are you there, Mike? Our first speaker, rather. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm in.
Are you okay? Are you ready to go, Mike? You okay?
Yeah, let me share my screen. There's a banging in the background. I don't know where it's coming from.
Somebody's hammering something, aren't they?
I think that might be Jane. If you put yourself on, there you go, on mute.
Oh,
oh,
right.
Jane's hammering.
Right.
Oh, apologies, but actually, I was just picking up a question. Here's my excuse. Paul has just asked where your property was up north, Rob. Just while Michael's getting Hartlepool. Okay, I'm going to mute myself now.
Yes. Okay, thanks.
Cool. Right, you ready for me to jump in, Rob?
Yeah, I'm ready, Mike. I'm going to mute myself now. Okay, cheers.
Cool, right. Evening, everyone. So my name is Michael Primrose. I operate 2 companies, Property Finance Collective, Property Finance Guy. Property Finance Guy is my sort of personal brand. Collective is my overarching brokerage brand. So I'm just going to do a bit of a commercial finance roundup, really, just sort of what's going on at the minute, what to expect from the market, where the market's going, and yeah, just some of the sort of frequently asked questions that we're getting at the minute. So first thing to say is nothing in the presentation should be taken as financial advice. We're not FCA regulated. It's commercial finance, doesn't need to be regulated. And as such, we don't give advice. We purely give you all the information you need in order to make an informed decision. So a bit about me. I'm going to rattle through this as quick as possible to allow as much time as possible for questions. So a bit about me, ex-conveyancer, ex-estate agent, then became a commercial finance broker. So sort of have seen deals from lots of different perspectives, really. So went and sort of brokering for someone else and decided after a couple of years, actually, I wanted to do it for myself. So back in November 2018, I was getting up on stage in Leeds and got introduced as the property finance guy. And at that point, I thought, you know what, actually, that's got a bit of a ring to it. So started operating under that brand, and then I've sort of built some other brands around that as well. So the Collective is the brokering arm. The Academy doesn't really matter because that's sort of fallen by the wayside now because we're actually too busy brokering to actually focus on any of the education stuff. And then the group is just a Facebook group that we operate to sort of connect people. Got a podcast because everyone seems to have a podcast these days. So this was set up beginning of 2019. So we've been going for just over a year now. And yeah, some good people on there, and it's quite a handy outlet to get a fair bit of information out there. In terms of services, we cover bridging finance, development finance, commercial mortgages. So I'm just very quickly going to talk about bridging finance and development finance and sort of what they are as products, and then move into a bit about what's actually going on at the minute. So in terms of bridging finance, I'm just going to move these speaker tiles out of the way because I can see everyone's faces looking at me, but I can't actually see my slides. There we go, that's better. So in terms of bridging finance, so designed to be short term. At the minute, I think realistically, you want to be taking bridging for sort of 9 to 12 months if you're looking at getting into it. Obviously, if you can get out quicker, great, but I think realistically, you've got to think now everything's going to take longer than you thought it was going to, which leads nicely into exit. Obviously, one of the big things at the minute is making sure that you can get out of the products that you're getting into. I've always been very passionate about sort of making sure if we get anyone into a bridging loan, for example, that everything's lined up in order to get them out as quickly as possible. It's not the cheapest finance to be stuck on if it starts to run over. In terms of bridging finance fees, they're fairly uniform across everybody. So normally a 2% arrangement fee, 1% exit fee, approximately about £1,000 for the lender's solicitor, and then £500 to £1,000 for the valuation, depending on what it is that you're actually buying, size of the property, etc., etc. One caveat to that is that at the minute, obviously with everything going on, with valuers not going out as often as they were, I'd say actually it's probably between £1,000 and £2,000 for a valuation at the minute, which is ludicrous, but it's just the cost of getting it done at the minute. And then in terms of loan to value, this is based on sort of current loan to values rather than sort of what we were pre-corona or what we're going to be post-corona, because actually post-corona, none of us know what we're going to be at. So currently we're looking at a cap of about 65% of purchase price. Some might go higher to 70. They may even go to 70% of market value as well. So it could potentially reduce the deposit. Oh, there we go. So in terms of rates, again, this is all based on sort of current, what's going on at the minute. So it depends on the leverage you're taking, et cetera, et cetera. So between 0.5 and 1.5% a month is where we're placing stuff at the minute. And I'll talk through a couple of deals that we've placed recently as well, which will sort of give you an idea of where stuff is actually being placed at the minute. Bridging finance obviously is ideal for auctions, with it being 28-day deadlines. Obviously, that's the bridging finance is the quickest finance that you can put in place. If you were to go for a buy-to-let or residential mortgage on an auction purchase, you might find that it doesn't complete in the timeframes. A lot of people are buying at auction at the minute, obviously with the current situation. It seems to be an avenue that more and more people are taking. Bridging finance will allow some refurb to take place as well. So if you're purchasing something that you can do any sort of work on under a buy-to-let or a residential mortgage, you shouldn't, in theory, be doing those works. So that's where bridging comes into allow you to do those works to then refinance out. In terms of speed, bridging finance can be done in as little as 5 working days. I need to change this, and I say every time I put this up that I'm going to change it, because actually we've done one in 4 working days. So actually we've broken that 5 working day. So it is very, very quick finance. In terms of development finance, what I'll do, I'll go to the next slide and then come back one. So development finance is broken into essentially 3 levels. So you've got your senior debt, which normally caps out at 65% loan to GDV or 80% of cost, whichever ceiling you hit first. You've then got stretch senior, which goes up to sort of 70% loan to GDV or 90% of cost. And then mezzanine finance, which comes in on a second charge, sits above senior debt or stretch senior debt, and normally goes up to 75% loan to GDV or 90% of cost. Some will push up to 95% loan to cost, which is known as super mezzanine, but it's very rare to get hold of that at the minute. But it is possible. Development finance is there to, the difference between development finance and bridging finance is that bridging finance is only there to assist with the purchase, whereas development finance is there to assist with the purchase and the refurb costs or the development costs. The thing to remember with development finance is that those refurb or development funds that you're looking to borrow are released in tranches in arrears. So you've got to be able to cash flow yourself in order to get through the stages of the development to then claim the money back from the lender, or have a contractor that's liquid enough to actually cash flow it for you. In terms of a couple of things to bear in mind, contingency, this is a big one at the minute. Always make sure you've got contingency on your build costs, so minimum 10% contingency. So if you think your build costs are going to be 100 grand, make sure you're budgeting 110. If they're going to be 200 grand, budget 220, etc., etc. You get the idea. But also the other thing is a contingency on time as well. So especially at the minute, if you think it's going to take you 12 months, take 15 months. If you think it's going to take 15 months, take 18 months. If you think it's going to take 18 months, take 24 months. It's just about giving yourself that breathing room, because the problem is, and coming on to the exit, if you don't exit in time, you fall into default rates, you could potentially fall into repossessions. There's all sorts of other things that could happen. So it's better to take it for longer than you think you're going to need it for. With bridging and development, you only ever pay interest for the time that you've got the loan. Now, the only thing to bear in mind is that those percentages I mentioned earlier, like for example, 65% of the purchase price, that's your gross facility, and then they take all of the interest and fees off up front, which, to give a visualization in terms of a development loan, they'll take all of the interest of the term up front. So if you're going for 12 months, but you decide to actually go for 15 months, then you are going to lose an extra 3 months worth of interest up front, but that could be beneficial in the long run if it means you then don't fall into default rates. So this just gives a bit of a visualization as to how a development loan facility is sort of broken down. So if you imagine that pot in the middle is 65% of your GDV. So what happens is the lender takes all of the interest out. So if you're taking it for 12 months, they take 12 months worth of interest out. They take all your arrangement fees, broker fees, quantity surveyor fees, monitoring surveyor fees, any fee that they can think of will come out of that pot as well. If you imagine the bill costs come out and go into a separate facility, which you then draw down on in arrears in tranches, whatever's then left in that pot becomes your day one advance. So that could be 1% of the purchase price, that could be 70% of the purchase price. It just completely depends on what's come out of that facility. So there's no set, you will get 70% of your purchase, 100% of your refurb, because it may not work out like that. And likewise, if you already own the land, or if you already own the property unencumbered, and then go for development finance, whatever's left in that pot becomes your net day one advance in terms of almost like a refund as to what you've already paid. In terms of security, always going to take a first charge, means they're first in the queue, means that if anything happens, they're the first ones to get their money out. They may take security over other assets in the form of second charge, for example. Exact same as first charge, they're just second in the queue. Now, the thing to bear in mind is that the first charge holder has no obligation to pay off the second charge holder. So you may be in a situation where the first charge holder goes, gets themselves paid off, sells the property, and then you've got a second charge holder that has no cash come out of the deal, which is when they fall back on things like personal guarantees and debentures. So personal guarantee, very simply, is you signing a bit of paper to say, yeah, I'm going to guarantee the debt of my limited company, because most of the stuff we're talking about is done in limited companies. So you're signing it to say, yeah, if it all goes wrong, then yeah, you can come after my house, my cars, whatever it may be. Now, it's not quite as simple as that, because obviously there's other bits to sort of keep in mind, but in its sort of most layman format, that's how it works. In terms of a debenture, that's a fixed and floating charge over all assets within a limited company. Now, the difference between a personal guarantee and a debenture is that a personal guarantee is normally capped to a percentage of what you've borrowed. So if you borrowed £1 million, a personal guarantee would normally be capped to 10% of that. So you're only signing on the dotted line for £100,000 worth of responsibility. A debenture is unlimited. Now, with a debenture, that sits over your limited company. They can just keep coming after assets within your limited company. So that's why you hear about people ring fencing developments and sort of splitting up what they're doing. Because if you went and did a development in your holding company, which is where you held all your portfolio, and then something went wrong with the development in your holding company, then all of a sudden, all of the assets that are in your holding company are at risk because of the debenture. The other thing as well is that you're going to struggle to have more than one debenture over a limited company for obvious reasons. If someone's got an unlimited debenture over your limited company, you can't then give another one, because who would have sort of priority in that? Collateral warranties are more for developers, essentially as a step-in right for the lender. So your professional team essentially signs a bit of paper to say, yeah, okay, if the developer passes away or if the lender has to repossess the site, then essentially they will continue to work for the lender in order to deliver that scheme. Right, on to the interesting stuff. So what's happening in the market at the minute? It's a lot of doom and gloom. around sort of at the minute in that everyone stopped lending, nobody's able to borrow any money. It's all just sort of grinding to a halt. So I've just put this together, very, very simple, as you can see. So this just shows across our entire panel, which is about 150, 200 lenders, we've seen about 50% have had a minor loan to value drop. So that's 5 to 10%. So that's lenders who have gone from 75% down to 70 or 75 down to 65. We've seen about 50%. So it's quite a significant amount. About 25% have had 10% or more drop. So that's lenders who have gone maybe from 75% down to 50%, 75 down to 60, whatever it may be. And then the other 25% is made up of lenders who are either lending as normal or have paused lending entirely. Now, this is the current situation as it stands sort of today. Now, when I gave this talk last week, that green section was double the size that it is now, and the purple section was half the size. So what we've seen is lenders who have made significant loan to value drops have now actually moved back up into the minor loan to value drops. So we're actually seeing, as things stand at the minute, an increase in loan to values sort of across the board. Now, it's not sort of major jumps up, but it's enough to sort of bring it a bit more into normality. And there's lenders who have been lending as normal throughout all of this. A couple more have started getting back to that position. And that paused section is getting smaller as well as more lenders come back into the market. So just to go through a couple of questions that we're getting asked pretty much daily. So the first one is, why are lenders pulling back or pausing? The simple answer is essentially when all of this started, what are we now, 6 weeks ago, when the Chancellor announced mortgage holidays, the high street banks, or one of the high street banks, took 60,000 phone calls in, I think it was 24 hours after that announcement, or they had 60, I don't think they answered all 60,000. Now, the problem is if you've got that volume of phone calls coming in, that volume of emails, that volume of inquiries coming in, nobody was prepped for this level of business. So the issue is that lenders have had to pull back or pause products, mainly because they cannot deal with the sheer volume of people ringing and questioning everything that's going on. Now, if you think all the high street banks have probably a couple of hundred members of staff each, you would imagine, in call centres, they have more capability to deal with this sort of thing. If you take the average bridging lender, they have on average about 10 members of staff, all in. So that's in total, they have about 10 members of staff. Now, if you think one of them probably does, or probably has on their books at any one point, a couple of hundred clients. Now, when the Chancellor announced all the mortgage holidays, everything else, obviously nothing was put in place for bridging, development, or any of the commercial lending. So there was no, yet you can go and take a 3-month holiday. So the issue is that all of the bridging lenders, all of the development lenders were getting phone calls constantly from people saying, what are my options? Now, the difference is when you're phoning a high street bank, you're specifically saying, right, I want a 3-month mortgage holiday. That's what I want to do. Give that to me. There's a process in place. They take you through that process. Now, the issue is when you're phoning a bridging lender, you're going, well, actually, what are my options? You've then got to sit and go through every single option. You've then got to decide what option's best for you. And if you think all of these guys are phoning up at the same time, all panicked, it's not ideal. So a lot of lenders were pulling back and pausing just purely so that they could focus their time on dealing with all of these existing clients phoning them constantly. Now, that's the biggest reason. The second reason, obviously, is valuations. That was obviously a big one straight away. The issue is that if you aren't getting a full-blown RICS valuation, the alternative is a desktop valuation. Now, a desktop valuation is not as reliable as a red book valuation by any stretch of the imagination. Now, lenders are all about managing risk. Now, if they lend 75% based on a red book valuation, their risk is fairly low because they've got a 30-page valuation that they can rely on. If they lend 75% based on a desktop valuation, their risk is monumental because it's a desktop valuation. Nobody's been inside the property. It's based on local comparables. So the issue is that they had to bring their loan to values down. And obviously, although we're in the 21st century, a lot of bridging lenders, development lenders, solicitors haven't quite made it into the 21st century yet. So relying on desktop valuations was not an easy thing for them to do. So that's what, again, another reason why a lot of them have pulled back or paused. And then the third reason is solicitors. Now, again, although we're in the 21st century, nobody seems to quite understand a paperless legal transaction. There's no such thing. So solicitors have to see you face to face. They have to give you independent legal advice. You have to be face to face when you sign the documents. You have to go into their office, everything else. Well, obviously we're on lockdown, so that's not going to work. So the issue was, again, is that lenders were having to pull back and pause whilst they put all of these new processes in place. So that's a very long answer to a very short question, but hopefully that gives you an idea of actually it's not all doom and gloom. They haven't all pulled out because they've run out of money. They haven't all pulled out because the market's gone bust overnight. It is a case of thousands of phone calls coming in, valuers not valuing, solicitors not being available. Now, obviously, I haven't got a crystal ball. I don't know what's going to happen with the market, but I think the market at the minute is probably the smallest element of this, out of actually just trying to get all of the cogs in the machine to work. The next biggest question is, should I take a mortgage holiday? Now, as current figures stand, 1 in 7 people have actually taken a mortgage holiday. Now, I'm not going to answer this question. I'm not going to say yes or no because it's everyone's personal preference. What I'm going to do is just give you a couple of things that have come up recently, which will hopefully enable you to make a decision. So the first one is, although the FCA have released a one-page document saying that this won't affect your credit score, they haven't put anything out to say that it won't appear on your credit file. So potentially this is going to appear on your credit file, which is then potentially going to have repercussions for future borrowing. Now, again, the FCA have said that it shouldn't have an impact on future borrowing, but again, how can you sort of predict what's going to happen in the future? Now, I've heard of people who have taken mortgage holidays and have then gone and tried to get further borrowing and have struggled. Now, I suppose the easiest way to explain that is if you're going to a lender and saying, I can't afford to make these payments, and then in the other hand saying, give me more money, it doesn't really make any sense. So I think you need to weigh up the merits of a mortgage holiday based on your own circumstances. I think it's one of those things where I would only take it if you really genuinely need it, and just weigh up the repercussions that it could have in the future. What I would say about the bounce back loans and things like that is that I predict that they probably won't have an impact on any future borrowing. I don't think it can have an impact as such, but I think the mortgage holidays are slightly different. So the other question that we're getting asked as well is, all of that's great, but actually, what do we do now? How do we buy properties? How do we sort of proceed with all these different things that are in place? So I just wanted to talk through a couple of different options that you've got sort of moving forward. How am I doing for time, Rob? Have we got about 15 minutes left? He's miles away. I'll assume I've got 15 minutes. He's jumping on there. No, he's gone. He's not going to know how to unmute it. It's fine. Right.
Oh, so, it's okay. I'm unmuted.
Oh, there you go. Have we got about 15 minutes left?
Yes, you have. About
cool.
that.
Okay.
I wasn't asleep. I was dealing with something.
No, that's fine. That'll teach me for trying to take you by surprise. Right. So bridging below market value. So obviously, with everything that's going on at the minute, there's going to be opportunities to start to pick deals up below market value. So just to talk through a couple of scenarios. Some of these figures are based on pre-corona because the problem is it's so difficult to predict where we're going to end up that we almost have to take where we were as a starting point and then move from there. So based on 1.3 as a market value, 1 million as a purchase price, you can see 75% of the purchase price, which is what you would have been getting. And it is still possible with a couple of lenders, but this is hopefully where we'll get back to. And then with 6 months of interest, 2% arrangement fee, everything else, that would have left you with having to put in about 310,000. So you would have needed a 31% deposit plus all your soft costs. Now, if you flip that to 75% of the market value, which again was doable pre-corona, and again is still potentially doable with a couple of lenders as well, then that would have taken your deposit down from 31% down to 10.3, just by tweaking slightly what we're actually lending against. And then the final option was 80% of market value, which again, pre-corona was possible. I mean, fingers crossed we'll get back to this point. I don't know whether we will or not, but it's good to sort of show you where we could get to. So that would actually drop your input down to essentially 4.3% plus soft costs. So it makes a massive difference being able to lend against market value rather than purchase price. Some of the caveats to that obviously is it's got to be genuine below market value. You can't just walk into an estate agent and say, right, you've got a property on for 1.3, I'm going to buy it for $1 million, because chances are it's probably only worth $1 million. And if the valuer goes out, they're going to take that stance of a property is only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. So the situations where this works best is probably direct to vendor, maybe a probate case as well. It tends to work fairly well, or just a distressed vendor in general. So if someone's going through, obviously what no doubt a lot of us will be is difficult times at the minute where they've got to get rid of some assets pretty quickly, then you might find that a valuer does value that genuinely sort of above what you're paying for it. The other big thing at the minute is option agreements. We've got no end of clients at the minute who are agreeing option agreements. So essentially, again, in its sort of layman format. So an option agreement is essentially you agreeing to buy something for X number of pounds on the basis that you get planning permission or something of that description. So essentially what would happen is I would go and find a landowner and say, right, I'm going to buy your land for £100,000 subject to planning permission. So when the planning comes in, I will pay you £100,000 and I will take that land on. Benefit of that is that probably once it's got planning permission, it's going to be worth more than £100,000. So you can actually then use the bridging below market value bits that we've just spoken about. You're essentially building equity into that deal. The sort of flip side to a option agreement is a lease option. It works in exactly the same format. You're saying, yeah, I'll buy your property for £100,000, but I'm going to give you a monthly rental, for example. So it's essentially, it's almost like doing a rent-to-rent deal, but actually agreeing a purchase price at the same time. And it allows you to just make a bit of income potentially while you're sort of doing whatever you want to do on that option. So for example, I might go and find a 4-bedroom house, agree to buy it for 200 grand, agree to pay, I don't know, £1,000 a month, for example, as a rental. But actually during the lease option, I'm going to run it as an HMO. And then I might make £2,000 worth of income, therefore very basically giving me £1,000 worth of profit, obviously before bills and whatnot come out. But essentially what I could do is if I took £1,000 a month, let's say, ran it for 5 years, end up with £60,000, actually that's my deposit. So I've actually created my own deposit. So lease options are great actually because you can either build your own deposit in, or if you're increasing the valuation of a property during the period of the option, you can then bridge against that, for example. There's loads and loads of different creative things you can do with all this. The equivalent of an option, I'll say the equivalent, sort of the mirror image, if you like, is an exchange with delay completion. So the difference here is that you're actually exchanging contracts at whatever the agreed purchase price is, subject to something happening or subject to you going in and refurbing the property, planning permission, whatever it may be. The difference between an exchange and an option is that with the option, you are in control. So you have the control to serve notice on the vendor. With the exchange, they have the power to serve notice on you. So with an option, when planning permission comes in, you would then go to the vendor, right, okay, we're ready to complete now. Gives you time to do the pre-commencements, gives you time to get it sort of shovel ready or do anything you need to do. The problem with an exchange is that the day planning permission drops in, you'll be served with notice to complete. Doesn't give you any time to get anything in place. So exchange with delay completion can be risky if you haven't got finance in place, or if you're relying on something happening and it doesn't happen as quickly as you thought. With an option as well, you can make that assignable, so you can actually sell your option on to somebody else. With an exchange, it's very, very difficult to sell that exchange to someone else. In fact, actually, it's pretty much impossible. But what you could do is you could sell the property to someone else and then do a simultaneous exchange and completion, but that's probably a conversation for a different day. But they work in very similar ways in that you're essentially adding value and just trying to be creative. And then deferred payment, we're actually doing one of these at the minute. We've got a property that we're purchasing. We've got bridging on that property. The bridging is releasing, I think it's £72,000. We've agreed to give the vendor £72,000. The remainder of the purchase price, which I think is about 50 grand, is then going to essentially sit as a deferred payment. The bridging company are happy for us to put no money into the deal. We're going to do all the refurb, we'll own the property, etc., etc. We'll do all of that, and then once it's worth, probably only for about 220 is what we think is going to be worth when it's finished. We'll then refinance it and pay everybody off. But what that saves us is having to find an upfront deposit. It's quite difficult to get a bridging lender to agree to this sort of thing because it depends on the security that the vendor is going to want. Now, we're very lucky in this scenario that actually the vendor doesn't want to charge. They're just going to put a restriction on title. So they're going to submit an RX1 with the land registry to say that we can't sell the property without their permission. Still quite restrictive, but actually it's better than them having a charge over the property. And then the last bit, I'm going to finish a couple of minutes early, hopefully. So last bit I want to talk about is just developer exit. So this is essentially how you can get out of deals that you're already in. So a couple of case studies. This one is a case study of a developer exit we did where the developer was in trouble. The next one is a case study of where the developer isn't in trouble but needs some cash. So development was 8 bungalows, worth 3.2, got 2.4 as a gross loan, netted down to 2.25 after they paid off their existing development finance, because essentially a developer exit is almost like a bridging loan. So once they paid off the existing finance with this replacement loan, it released them £650,000, which they then managed to invest into 2 other properties, or 2 other projects rather. Now, with developer exit, the issue on this deal, for example, is that the client was coming to an end of their development finance. So they had 8 bungalows that hadn't quite sold yet. They were getting to the end of their development finance. They're getting threatened with repossession, default rates, all sorts of other things. And 2 other projects had come up that they wanted to invest in. So with this one, this has allowed them to release the money to go into 2 other projects. It's allowed them to clear their development finance, so they've avoided any repossession or anything like that. If they hadn't taken this, they could have potentially lost those 8 bungalows. They've lost the 2 other projects that they were going into, and it then turns into a very, very difficult situation. On the flip side, you can also use it just to equity raise as soon as you finish building the units. So these guys have just finished building 22 flats. In fact, actually practical completion isn't until mid-June now, but they've already sold 5 off plan. Their development finance doesn't run out until, I want to say November, it might be October, but anyway, the back end of this year. But they've got to a point where actually they've finished the units. Obviously, they're going to go through a lull of sales now. So basically for them, it's just a case of, well, let's pay off the development finance. The developer exit is at the same interest rate as what they're paying already. So essentially for them, they're just replacing the existing product that they've got, but equity raising to put into other projects. So it can be useful if you're just getting to the point where actually other stuff's coming up, or you're on, for example, if there's any first-time developers listening, you might develop a set of units, for example, you might be on 12, 14% per annum in terms of your development finance. And then you might say, well, okay, what I'll do is I'll take that expensive development finance, or that overly expensive development finance, and actually, as soon as I finish building, I'll then flip it onto a cheaper product to allow your sales period to be a cheaper rate of interest. And it's just about being smart with how you sort of structure these things. But there are products available if you're getting to that point of wanting to get out of a project or sort of equity raise out of something that's existing. And then very last thing, just to finish off. So these are some of the sort of interest rates and percentages that we've seen. This is over the last probably 3 weeks. So we had one that was 75% of the purchase price net, 65% of the market value, 75% of the purchase price, 73% of the purchase price, 87% of the purchase price, 65% of the purchase price, 70% of the market value. So that last one is the developer exit that I just showed you. And you can see these are ranging anywhere from sort of 0.7 to 0.99. So we've been very lucky that actually not a lot of what we're placing at the minute at all is that expensive actually. So this is very similar to what we were doing sort of pre-coronavirus anyway. So we managed to place some really good deals, and this is just a very small percentage of sort of what's going on at the minute, but yeah, most definitely still a very active market at the minute. and that's me done. Cheers,
Thank
Matt.
you, Michael.
No, just
Thank
trying
you,
to mute
Michael. Oh,
just
I
trying
was
to
just going to
unmute
say there's a
my
couple
mic.
of questions. Oh.
Okay, Jane, sorry, butting in.
Oh, sorry, Rob. I was just going to say thanks very much to Michael. I don't know whether he saw there's just a couple of questions Andy had asked early on. Andy Arter. Hi, Michael. What type of person is your average client? And what kind of
My
deal are
average
they
client?
usually working on? Yeah, it's an
Okay,
unusual
so
question.
it's difficult to nail down an average client limit because we've got quite a broad spectrum of clients. But actually, I suppose I can probably put it into three definitions probably. So the first one is small refurbs. So clients who are doing what I would define as a small refurb is anything between sort of 50,000 and £100,000 worth of works. So we get a lot of clients who are doing small refurbs. So maybe a house into an HMO or a house into a couple of flats, that sort of thing. And they typically tend to be up north. The second tier that we tend to get a lot of is first-time developers. So we work a lot with first-time developers, guys who are trying to get that first step on the ladder. There's a lot of misconception that it's very, very difficult to become a developer. No, sorry, I should reword that. It's very, very difficult to get development finance as a first-time developer. But actually, it's not that difficult as long as you've got the right team around you. And then I suppose the third level, and actually what we're getting more of now is the more experienced, I would call them regional house builders. So we actually work with quite a lot of the bigger house builders around Lincolnshire, Yorkshire. I actually own shares in a big development company up in York. So we're starting to diversify into that sort of bigger pool. But I would say the two main clients at the minute, you sort of your small refurbs and new developers. Probably wasn't the right way to answer that, but it sort of gives you an idea.
That made complete sense. I've also got another question for you from Adam. Are open market bridges still doable in the current climate? And if so, what loan to value rate? And then he goes on to say, if they do work, how do you get onto term finance at a later stage when the land registry shows that you paid for the property not what it was worth?
Yeah, so there's a fairly easy way to answer that, I guess. So open market bridges are very much still available. So we're still very much able to get borrowing based on the current market value. And in terms of how they work, it is really as simple as they work like a normal bridge, but we're very, very dependent on the value we're going at and actually valuing it at what you actually want it to be valued at. Now, the issue with open market bridging is that actually what you tend to find with the value is that they'll just value it whatever they fancy at the time. So we're trying to work with more bridging lenders who don't actually tell the value of what you're buying the property for. Because what we tended to find was actually that more and more valuers are starting to fall into this default of, oh, it's just worth what someone's willing to pay for it. Whereas actually what we found was when valuers weren't aware of what you were actually paying for it, they started to value it where we expected. So we had a property that was actually on with an estate agent at 220. Clients agreed to buy it for 150. Bridging lender had no idea what the purchase price was. Estate agent didn't tell them, lender didn't tell them, client didn't tell them, and it came back at 220. So it's just trying to work with everyone in the chain to make sure that actually we get what we're after. And in terms of the term finance, with all of this, when you go onto a bridge, you've got to wait 6 months in order to refinance unless you're doing some element of refurb. Now, if you bought it below market value, it's fairly simple to explain that, because there's obviously a reason why you've got it below market value, whether it's probate or whether it's a distressed vendor or something like that. So it's quite easy to explain away. But actually, if you wait 6 months, then a lender in theory can't take a previous purchase price into account. And that's why this 6 month rule exists. But actually, if you're doing any sort of element of refurb anyway, then they can't take the previous purchase price into account anyway, because you've done refurb and works in the meantime anyway. That will hopefully answer that one.
Yeah, I think it does. Thanks, Michael. One more question from Holly. How do you think options will be affected, if at all, by COVID-19?
We might need some clarity here. So does she mean options in terms of lending options, or does she mean options in terms of option agreements? If she's still on, hopefully she can.
Yeah,
answer.
is she there? I thought options, but that's just my mind. Hey, Holly, are you there? She may have disappeared.
Still says she's in the attendee. She's
option agreements. She means
option agreements, right? Okay. So how will they be affected by COVID-19? So I don't think they'll be affected in any way, really. If anything, what we'll actually find is more people being open to the possibility of actually agreeing to an option agreement. So pre-corona, vendors were in a great position. They could put a property on the market, and actually it would probably sell pretty quickly. It was quite a buoyant market. The issue we've got now is that it's by no means if you put a property on the market, there's no guarantee it's going to sell quickly. So vendors are going to be open to those more creative strategies. So I think in terms of options, now is probably the best time to start suggesting that sort of strategy. So I think in terms of how they'll be affected, I think they'll be affected because there'll be a more open strategy to start moving into. I think actually what people will find is option agreements that they agreed pre-corona could be quite difficult, because if you've agreed a purchase price on a property, for example, on pre-corona levels, and something's happened during, obviously corona's affected the market, and that option agreement doesn't work anymore, then I suppose that could be an issue. But actually the joy of an option is that you can just walk away from it. So you've got with an option, when you agree to purchase something, you've got no sort of liability to stay in that deal. The reason you take an option is so that you can walk away with no penalty. The other joy of options is that there's no sort of guaranteed format of an option. So what I mean by that is you can go to a solicitor and you can word or structure an option however you want to. So I've not really answered Holly's question. I've just gone off on a tangent on why options are good, but yeah, I don't think they'll be affected. I think if anything, it would just be better to be able to now sort of push them forward.
Thanks, Michael. I think you did answer it well. And as you say, options are easy to walk away from, aren't they? So I think you were sort of leading on that if values have changed, then I guess you tear up the option sort of thing.
Yeah, well, that's it, exactly that.
Yeah. And there's another question here from Will. What lenders are suitable for high yield cash flowing, but cheaper properties in a larger northern portfolio? So sub 40k units?
Oh, crikey. Right, okay. So sub 40k is well, pretty near on impossible these days to get mortgages on. There are a couple of lenders that may look at them. I'd say with that sort of thing, you're better off with a residential broker rather than a commercial. But what I would actually say is if you're struggling to, I've just seen he's put a 600 grand portfolio. Yeah, if it's a 600 grand portfolio, it doesn't matter how many properties it's made up of. If it's 600 grand, then most lenders would look at that. So presumably, what's that? It's 15 properties. So yeah, quite a few lenders would look at that because the overall value is above sort of their minimum lend. He's just put a block of flats. As long as they're above 30 square meters, you should be absolutely fine. If it's below 30 square meters, then you've got a second issue, which is that you're below minimum size. But if it's 28, 29, then you might be able to get away with it. But if they're sort of 20 square meters, then it tends to get relatively difficult. 37 square meters is the smallest. Great. Yeah, you should be fine. Most lenders will look at that because you're a 600 grand overall valuation. In fact, for something like that, if it's in a limited company, I'd be talking to people like Shawbrook, Precise, Hampshire Trust, all the sort of challenger banks, if you're looking to get maximum leverage. If you're not necessarily bothered about leverage, then maybe speak to some of the high street banks. Jane's gone. Oh no, she's back.
Sorry, yeah, I've just noticed my Mac suddenly is low power, so I'm going to just go off in a minute. But what we wondered was, will you, yeah, there was somebody said, please, would you put your details up on screen again so people can get in contact with you? I think that was particularly Adam, who has an earlier question.
I would if I had them on a slide. You would have thought that a broker would put his contact details on a slide. Apparently not. So all I'll say is that if you search the Property Finance Collective or the Property Finance Guy on Google, you'll find all of our websites, all of our details, or just search Michael Primrose or the Property Finance Guy or the Property Finance Collective on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. We're in all the usual places. And yeah, I'll pop my number and email address into the chat because I should be able to put it in there as well. I'll do that now.
Thank you, Michael.
It's all right. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, so over
there we
to
go. So
Rob,
I should have gone through to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Michael. That was really informative. I can really tell that you're an investor and not just a broker. It really comes across in your presentation. It's really, really good. It's really good. A lot of good information and well delivered. Thank you.
Right, brilliant. Thank you, Mike. It's wonderful. In answer to Holly's question, I'm not a COVID-19 expert by any stretch of imagination, but my Property Network magazine came through the door yesterday, and it's full of COVID-19 strategies, plans, what we're going to do for the future. I think it's probably quite informative if you haven't got one. If you can get one, if you can get hold of one, then it might help the answers for her. Other than that, I think we're almost on time for Niall and Matt, if you're ready, chaps. Yeah. Okay, I can't hear you, but I can see.
No, I think we're good to go.
Yeah, we're good to go. So I'll butt out and leave you to it, if that's all right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Jane, and cheers, Michael. And I'll mute myself. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you, Rob, and yeah, very informative presentation, Michael. Thank you for sharing that. Just while Matt sorts out his slides, I'm one half of Scott Baker Properties. There we go. This picture was taken when we were able to visit a barber.
What are you saying?
I don't think I've ever had this much hair before.
Yeah, we're trying to keep the hair in, but anyway, so yeah, thank you very much, Rob, for the introduction, and thank you, Michael, for that. It was very informative. It was just really interesting to hear how the lenders are thinking about it from their perspective. So yeah, welcome to a bit of a presentation that myself and Niall are going to give, leading up to kind of some Q&A up to 9 o'clock, I believe. And I couldn't really come up with a name for this presentation, and I just typed in 2020 Sucks as a working title, and it just stuck. And the reason being is I don't think 2020 sucks. I think 2020 is a huge opportunity. But I think most people would say that 2020 sucks in some way, shape or form, until you can find the reason why it doesn't suck. Because with every downturn, then there's a big opportunities. I think quite a few businesses will come out of this really thriving. So what we're going to do tonight, we are going to talk a little bit about ourselves. I don't know whether any of you have seen us speak before. We did present at Croydon Property Meet a while ago now. So some of you may have seen us speak before. And then we're going to talk about the top 5 investor challenges that we have seen. And I'll explain a bit about that when we get there, and the top tips to overcome them. And then also we can look at what's next for UK housing, not really focusing on the finance side of things, because that's what Michael's done, not the finance, but the lending side of things. We are going to look at finance, but not really the lending side of things. So let's get cracking. So we'll start with a bit about me, since I'm the one that's stolen the microphone first of all. So my name is Matt Baker, and I am a professional musician. I'm a professional pianist, composer, arranger. You're actually in my studio right now. If I just turn my laptop around, you can see I'm a pianist. And that's what I've done. So for the first, in my 20s, I was a professional musician. I went out and I gigged, but I also was a teacher. I realized very quickly that by being a gigging and a jobbing musician, the income wasn't very high, wasn't very reliable. When it was high, it wasn't around for very long. So I went into teaching because it was more reliable, and I set up a business called the Tame Institute of Music in Oxfordshire because I became oversubscribed in my teaching business. I didn't have enough time to teach all the inquiries that I was getting, so I took on some other teachers to help with that. So that's where I was in my 30s. And when I got to the age of 30, I discovered that property investing was probably something which might be better for me. I went to an event actually to understand more about how to grow a business, and there were other speakers talking about other types of businesses like share trading. Bitcoin wasn't around kind of just by then really as a main thing, but public speaking and property investing. I'd always known that property investing was a good thing to do with money, but I always thought I'd make my money in music and then invest it into property. Whereas the realization I had when I was 30 was that I can make my money in property, and then with the time that I get from that passive investment, that that income ongoing, I can then use that time and money to invest into music, as you can see in this semi-studio, semi-presentation suite, semi-office, semi-workout room that we're in right now. So here's a bit of evidence. I am a musician. I had much longer hair in this photo up here. That was on this morning on ITV, Scottish television. Toured with Jamie Cullum a little bit. This is my current project, Lo Que Ba. This is a Afro-Cuban music. So I'm a jazz pianist. So one thing I really love is Latin American music. So we've got a band at the moment called Lo Que Ba. We were crowdfunding for funds to record an album, but we paused it because we know that people majority of people do have a need for their cash to stay in their bank accounts right now. So we will come back and revisit this probably in the second half of the year. So I discovered property investing about 5 years ago now. I've been an investor and developer for 5 years, and became very quickly an HMO and co-living specialist. I realised that the cash flow from small buy-to-lets was good. It was consistent, but wasn't very much. So you needed quite a lot of them to make a dent in income. So I thought, well, let's do HMOs because they're higher cash flow, and I very much fell in love with this co-living word, this environment that you can create for your tenants and really where they want to be, where they want to live. But also property educator. I do help people with their property portfolios as well. I speak at events like this, and we've spoken at a couple. Rob mentioned at the beginning that there are quite a few online meetups popping up. So we've spoken at a few of those already. Doing different talks. It's the first time we've actually done this particular presentation. So so you're in for a treat. And we mentor people with a host of our own mastermind, focusing on co-living and next level HMOs, and we coach people as well. And that's through our business, Scott Baker Properties, which is our development business, and the HMO platform, which is our coaching business. But I'm also a podcast host, as Rob says, or as Michael said, everyone has a podcast these days. We do have a podcast ourselves. It's called Property Jam. And I'll let Niall tell you a bit more about that in a moment. And we host our own network, which is also online at the moment, called Brighton Property Meet. But it's a very different thing. It's not presentations. It's kind of an accountability group at the moment. But when we were in real life, we were down the pub, just networking and meeting people. So that's a little bit about me. Who are you, Niall?
Who am I? Yeah, good question. So my background is slightly different to Matt's. So I've spent a lot of time working in the corporate environment, and this picture was actually taken a few years ago, or last year actually. It's 12 months ago now, since this picture was taken when I was in South Africa. And one of my goals, one of my dreams was to go on safari, but I was always tied up in the corporate world, and taking time out to travel and do things like that was always quite difficult to do. So yeah, this is a group that I'm with. In the top right hand corner, you can see a group of us there. There were 12 or 13 of us in total. So one of the mastermind groups that I attend, we all went together this time last year, and it was such an amazing experience. But before that, I worked in financial services. So my background is working as a contractor in finance. So it wasn't working with the figures. It was actually in the back office dealing with insurance complaints. So if any of you have ever heard of the dreaded PPI, well, first of all, I'm sorry, but I was involved in PPI as a complaint handler for about 4 or 5 years. Worked for the likes of lots of the high street banks, ombudsman services, that type of thing, just dealing with all the backlog of complaints as it came through. But working in the corporate environment was really not something that I enjoyed a lot. And I was always looking for a way of generating an income where I could have more freedom to be able to go traveling, to do my safaris, to take holidays or whatever it is that I wanted to do without having to ask someone else's permission or to ask the boss if I could have time off. So I started investing in property, investment and development, but initially just started off buying little buy-to-lets, and that grew over the past 5 years to building a portfolio along with Matt under Scott Baker Properties. So we met about 4 or 5 years ago, became friends first, and then set up the company after we had built that friendship and had a good relationship on the side as a friendship. So we're HMO and co-living specialists. So we spend a lot of our time now focusing on our HMO portfolio, designing them, creating very nice environments, co-living spaces for people to live in, and to have communities to socialize in as well. I do consider myself to be a people's person. So this lockdown, this lockdown scenario has been a bit of a challenge, but thanks to having the likes of Zoom, Skype, and webinars, etc. It's very easy to connect with people, but I do need to be around people. I do like being with people, which is why property is a good outlet for me. It's a good option. I do lots of networking. Michael, I've been to your PPN event a couple of times. Obviously, we were at this Croydon property event a couple of times as well, and lots of other networking events, and we've got our own networking event. So that's what I love to do. Property educator. So we speak at events, as Matt has said. We mentor other people. We have our own mastermind, and I've got a property coach as well. But we roughly about the same time. So we're running just over a year as well. So our podcast started in October 2019. And there's basically 3 friends, myself, Matt, and our other friend, Joe Akkar, who was also a property investor. We would meet up quite regularly and have a bit of a moan or a bit of a chin wag about what was going on in property, what was going well, what wasn't going well, and sharing experiences and helping each other out. So we decided that we would just put a mic in front of us and talk about everything to do with the human side of property. So it's not educational. It is just literally us talking about what's going well, what hasn't gone well, and our views and experiences basically as active investors and developers. So it's on all the usual places where you can find podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. So maybe have a listen if you fancy it. And like Matt said as well, we do have our own Brighton property meet, but again, slightly different format to how this is set up. So we would normally meet down in the Cricketers Pub in Brighton once a month and just talk everything about to do with property, really. So that's a bit about my background and personal achievements, I guess, a bit about me personally. But as on the property side, we have built a portfolio. The first 3 years of being in property, we built a portfolio worth 3.7 million, which is made up of 83 rental units and had a turnover of 474,000 annually. So that's what we achieved in the first 3 years of being in property. And to be honest, I would say the majority of that was achieved after Matt and I started working together. Once we joined forces and were able to spend more time and we were holding each other accountability, like, things moved forward a lot quicker than it did before. And here's a picture of some of the properties that we have in the portfolio. So the one in the very center is an ongoing project, which is just about finished the refurb, and hopefully lockdown will be lessened soon, so we can get the finishing touches on it and get it signed off. Down in the bottom, we've got twins, so 2 properties right beside each other. We've got a little bungalow. We've got quite a large HMO thrown in there as well. So lots of mixture of stuff. But like I say, the mixed started off doing the smaller stuff and progressively got bigger with the project that we do. So now we focus on the next level HMOs and co-living spaces. And that project I just mentioned to you, that's the big one, which is in Stockport. We were picked up last year by YPN. They were quite interested in the project and what we were doing in general. So it's quite relevant that you should mention YPN, Rob, because it was in February last year that we were in YPN magazine. So if you have that copy, or if you join YPN, then you'll be able to read a little bit more about us and about what we did. So that's a little bit about me and a little bit of what we've done. So I'll go back to Matt to talk about surveys.
Yeah, you might think, well, what on earth are we talking about here? But we love surveys. We love to ask people their opinion. And we've surveyed hundreds of HMO tenants. We've surveyed landlords, HMO landlords as well, to find out how they tick, what the landlord's thinking, but also how the tenants are thinking as well. So what's working, what's not working in properties. And we think that is so important when you're creating space that people have to share, because people have different opinions. So it's getting the right combination together, and every region, every area has its differing quirks. So we love surveys, and we did a survey. This is the tenant one. It's called the Shared Living Survey. It's just about to close. If you do have HMOs and you want to ask your tenants to take part, you've probably got to the end of this week to send them this link, which is sharedlivingsurvey.co.uk, and ask them if they're a tenant, click to take part. If you're a landlord, you can register as well and get a copy of the report emailed to you. Completely free. It's just data gathering, and then we can put that report together and send it out to landlords and share it, so that we as landlords across the UK can make better use of properties. The landlords that actually care, that is. So that's the survey that we did for tenants. The survey that we did for landlords was just as coronavirus hit. We went out to landlords and we asked, what issues are you facing right now? What are your fears and concerns? We asked them a whole bunch of questions, and we've summarized the results and we're sharing them with you tonight. And these are the top 5 concerns that they had. The number 1 was tenants not paying the rent. Number 2, that sense of that loss of control. Number 3 is voids, so having empty properties and empty rooms. Cash flow management, so being able to pay the bills at the end of the month, because if you've got voids and tenants not paying and expenses going out, you could find yourself with more money going out at the end of the month than coming in. So it's starting to cause some issues. And then a big one here is just fear, general fear about the current marketplace. So these are the top 5 challenges that landlords have said to us that they are struggling with. So we're going to go through these one at a time, and we're going to give you some examples of what we found, because we've encountered these as well, and we'll just share with you what's working and what's not. So, number 1, tenants not paying. Is this you or me, Niall?
This is you.
This is me. I'm going to talk about this one. So, tenants not paying. And if your tenants suddenly don't have any income, that's an issue, because maybe they've been laid off or they've been furloughed, and they suddenly turn around to you and say, "Oh, I can't pay the rent this month." That's not the end of the conversation. So there's a really important I think for us as landlords, I think it's really important to open a dialogue and communicate with them and help them, and be understanding. Normally the instant reaction when someone says I'm not paying the rent is you get your back up and you're like, well, why are you not paying the rent? But generally that is the wrong reaction anyway, because if someone's not paying the rent, what's the reasoning behind it? There's generally a story there, and if you can talk to them and understand what they're from their perspective, you can then come to an agreement, and they're going to be more open to paying you money in the future, because that's what you want to do, is you want to make sure if they can't pay it now, that they are going to be able to pay you in the future. To be understanding and build great long-term relationships. Now is an amazing time, because you've got a bunch of tenants, whether you've got buy-to-lets or HMOs, and if you haven't reached out to your tenants to even just to say, hi, how are you? How's it going? Are you okay? I think it's so important to do that. So we've done it with our entire portfolio. We've asked the question, how are you doing? Are you okay? And some of them just come back and say, yeah, absolutely fine. Yeah, and you just have a quick chat, and then they just going off what they're doing. So no, they have no concerns and no issues. And I think there's an assumption that if you reach out to your tenants and you ask them the question, are you okay, that they're going to suddenly turn around and say, oh no, I can't pay the rent. Give me a rent holiday. And that's not the case. And we've had some agents that we work with just being very shy about asking the question. And if put it in the right way, then you can build that relationship and build it up stronger than it was before. So those tenants are more likely to stay with you over the long term. So how could you help them? Well, maybe help them to get another job. So make some suggestions as to what they might be able to do to raise some income. So again, it comes down to that communication. So what are their concerns really? Losing their job as an employee. Well, first thing would be to ask them to go to their employer and just ask whether they can be furloughed rather than let go. If they are let go, can they go get a new job, like Tesco or Aldi or any of these, any supermarkets, Amazon, logistics. There are quite a lot of jobs that came on the market, and I've still seen a few available. So give them some suggestions of going out there. We have one tenant who lives in one of our HMOs. Actually, it's in a flat contained within one of our HMOs, and I sent the message out because we self-manage that one. I just sent him a text and I said, how are you getting on? He came back and he said, I lost my job last week as a doorman, because he's a bouncer for a nightclub, and they just cut the job straight away. And he said, I've already found a new one, and I'm going to be doing security for Sainsbury's. So within a week, he had lost his job and found another one, and he said, my paydays are different, so do you mind if I delay paying the full amount on the day, and I'll pay you the whole amount next month? And I said, that's absolutely fine. He paid half with what he had, because I wanted to make sure he had enough money left to live, and then he paid. He's already paid up. He's back on track. So, having that conversation, don't assume that they're going to come back and cause you problems. If they can't get a job, universal credit is an option for them. Universal credit can cover quite a bit of the rent and living costs for someone who's in an HMO or in a house. Universal credit, the person may not have even considered going onto it before. They might be like, no, I'm going to work. But universal credit is really easy right now. But you do it sooner rather than later, and help them sooner rather than later, because there is a bit of a backlog to get to you. But they don't ask many questions, and literally, the money will be in your bank within 4 to 6 weeks of applying. So you may have a little lull in income for that time, but then they should be able to pay you back in the future. So if the tenant has a business, and this stuff would apply to us as well as business owners, maybe suggest that they go and check out the government guidance on this. But things you can suggest is a self-employed grant. If they're self-employed, they can get their 3 months pay in June. Obviously, there's going to be a delay for you getting your rent, but they can get their average earnings from the last 12 months paid to them for 3 months, or 3 months worth in June. There are government grants available. If they've got a small office, they can get 10 grand a grant. They can get a CBILS loan, which is the coronavirus business interruption loan. And then the new Bubbles So we've got Sibbles and Bibbles at the moment, and the bounce back loan is great. We've applied for 3 business groups and we've got them all. It's very, very straightforward situation. So the Sibbles do not apply to property investment and development firms, but Bubbles does, as long as you've got turnover, and it's the turnover from 2019. And we're going to cover that a bit later on as well. But ask them, just suggest they adapt, reinvent their business. Same for us. We have to adapt and reinvent our businesses and find out how they can survive for now, and maybe just get another job. Because if they do need some income right now, this is a really good example. I've got from my musician circles, a friend of mine who's an amazing bass player. He plays for all sorts of artists. You've probably seen him on TV. You wouldn't have known it. But all of a sudden, his income just cut to 0. And he's done a couple of online gigs, some charity stuff, but very little income. And I saw that he posted the other day that he's now a delivery driver for Ocado. And so he's gone out and he's found someone that's going to work so he can continue. And he'll do that for a period of time. And then when things pick up again, he'll just go back into doing what he was doing before as a self-employed musician. So those are the tenants' concerns, and there are answers to a lot of this that can help you to get paid. And yes, you might have a bit of a cash flow issue. We'll talk about cash flow later. But if you can keep some money coming in, it just keeps things ticking over, which is the most important thing. It's keeping things ticking over. It's not necessarily making a huge profit. It's keeping things ticking over. The profits will come later. So challenge number 2.
Yes, challenge number 2. So loss of control. And I think this is quite a relevant thing to talk about, because and even personally, I guess, as well, especially at the very beginning of coronavirus lockdown, nobody felt like they could control anything. There is so much that was taken away from us. We can't socialize. We can't meet our friends. We can't see our families. We can't travel. We can't do networking in person. So there's a lot of things that had been taken away from us. But I guess the important thing to remember is that there is still a lot of things that we can control, and it's focusing on the stuff that you can control and not letting it take over, not letting it absorb you. That will help you and help you get through this period. So the main thing that we can control is ourselves, and working on our mindset. And by having a positive mindset and working and focusing on what we can do rather than on what we can't, will help us get through this and get out the other side safe, sane, and ready to hit the ground running again. I think it was Winston Churchill that said that this too shall pass. It's not going to last forever. There could be potentially new opportunities available. So perhaps building pipelines, making yourself ready, so that when things do settle down, that you're ready to hit the ground running. Having a routine is very important in these situations. So if you haven't worked from home before, or suddenly you've got the kids in the background and you're having to teach them, you need to have a routine in place, so that you keep yourself systemized, for want of a better expression. And one thing that I like to do to set myself up right is to have a very specific morning routine, where I do what's called the Miracle Morning. So there's a book I read a few years ago called Miracle Morning, and it basically focuses on setting yourself up right to tackle any tasks that come up during the day. So that can be, you can have your own version of it. It doesn't matter what it is, but it could be a version of exercising first before you do anything, meditating, reading personal development books before you turn on the news and listen to all the doom and gloom that's out there, maybe writing if that's your thing, or just taking time out by yourself and just time to reflect, prepare yourself for the day, so that when you do start your working day, that you do have a bit of a clearer head and are more prepared to face the day. As well as that, keeping a 9 to 5 routine, and not spending your day like this guy watching daytime television. It's very easy to fall into that trap of turning the TV on early in the day and watching all the crap that comes out of television. I've got a rule for myself. at home that I won't turn the TV on until at least 8 o'clock in the evening, so that I don't have that distraction taking my focus away from what I should be doing. Other things that we can be doing to relieve stress and keep our headspace in the right form is by doing exercise, and that can be any form of exercise. That can be body workouts, it can be cycling, it can be yoga, it can be running, whatever it is that is your thing, then it can help relieve stress and help you deal with things as well. Keeping in contact with other human beings, with family, with friends, coming to a networking event. I think the fact that you're here this evening is a good indication that you're obviously doing the right things, but keeping those interactions alive, keeping those interactions consistent and regular will really help as well. If you're alone and you feel like you've got no one to talk to, or you're trying to struggle and stress with everything by yourself, then it's a much more difficult position or place to be in. So everything will seem like it's more difficult to control than if you're sharing your issues and your problems with your peers. Practice mindfulness. I think this is also, again, really important. So again, it's kind of going back to the miracle morning. So it's having some kind of routine, whether that is meditating, whether that is doing yoga, whether that is reading, whatever it might be, or just spending time reflecting, just to focus on your mind. And you know, they do say a healthy mind does help with a lot of the stresses and the things that we have to focus on right now, or have to deal with. So control what you can. Focus on the things that you can control, not on those that you can't. So we can control what we do with our health. So we can choose to eat healthily. We can choose not to have a glass of wine every night. We can choose, you know, what to do. We can choose to have a good routine. We can choose to keep in contact with our friends, our peer groups, our mastermind groups, our networks, to keep us in the right mindset. And we can choose not to listen to all the news that happens every 5 minutes, because it's not helpful. Obviously, you do need to keep involved or keep up to date with what's happening in the world. But I'm guarantee if something happens in the world, you will find out about it, whether you're watching the news or not. So your actions and what you do yourself on a daily basis will dictate what the results will be. And when we've got a great opportunity now to create something, so you could be looking at what your business is, you can be looking at what your desires are, what your goals are, what you're passionate about, and start creating something around that. We've never had such a long space of time where we have been able to take a step back from the everyday world, and just spend time on ourselves and on our passions and on our visions and on our goals. So those are the main things that you can do if you're feeling out of control, to help bring you back and take control of what you can do rather than what you can't. So yeah, that's challenge number 2.
Thanks, Niall. I know at the beginning of lockdown, my body went automatically into Christmas mode,
Yeah.
and the wine came out and the gin came out, and yeah, I was eating not takeaways, but you know, ready meals rather than taking lots of time to cook. And there was definitely a week where, you know, it could have gone the other way. Well, I wasn't feeling very great, and I was watching TV, and because that's what happened in lockdown. What other time of the year are you in one house and not really doing anything else?
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, my body went to Christmas mode. I snapped myself out of that pretty quickly, which is good. So challenge number 3 is voids. Now, if you had empty rooms or empty properties going into lockdown, that's pretty painful. If you've lost tenants because of coronavirus, again, that's even more painful. So you might have some empty rooms now, empty properties, which you're finding it hard to fill. And this is probably out of the challenges, it's probably the one which you've got the least control over, but you still have an element of control. There are still things that you can do to get people in. So keep advertising. So we come at it from a very very obviously HMO room rental kind of background. So in our HMOs, we have tenants that are that moved out, moved back home, and but that was maybe, I think maybe like 3 tenants. They moved out of the property, one of the properties, and then went home, and then the rest have all stayed. And the ones that are staying in the properties are the ones that pay. And we've had no issues with payment apart from one tenant, and that tenant we had issues with them anyway. So actually what's happening at the moment is amplifying problems in your portfolio. So if you've got rooms that were difficult to let before, they're going to be nigh on impossible to let right now. And if you've got tenants where you had to, you know, remind them every single month and they always paid a week late and they kind of missed the rent by 100 quid, and then you constantly chase them and they were getting, and then they got ahead and then they got behind, you know, that's just going to be exacerbated by a situation like this. So this will be a good time to look at your portfolio and go, right, what's working and what's not working, and maybe I should be looking to change some of the bits in my portfolio. But with your rooms, when you know you've got good property, good rooms, keep advertising it, because people are moving. We've let 4 rooms in the last 2 weeks, and in 3 different properties and in 2 different areas. So people are moving, and you have to obviously do it safely. You can't do viewings in person. You have to do a virtual check-in. And you've got to get all the other tenants on board if you're doing a shared house. So everyone needs to be on board the fact that a new person is moving in. We've actually got a colleague of ours who's got 3 great HMOs on the south coast, who had a 5-bed HMO, and one of the tenants was a doctor, or is a doctor, and the other 4 tenants were staying in the house working from home or being furloughed. And then what they were getting uncomfortable that this doctor was going in and out of hospital dealing with coronavirus patients all the time. So in that regard, the tenant, none of them really wanted to move out, but there was this health and safety issue. So thankfully that particular, our colleague had another property which was empty, and then just the service accommodation unit, they just moved the tenant into that. So they moved into a flat for a bit and probably still there. So being creative with your portfolio, if you've got empty rooms and you've got tenants that are key workers that are going to be, or doctors or nurses, maybe there's a bit of moving tenants around to make sure that the key workers are living together and the people that work from home are living together. That's the benefit of having a larger portfolio. But obviously we need to follow all the guidance on social distancing, so nothing done in person. And when someone moves in, they should generally self-isolate, generally in their room. That can be hard, but we generally have all en-suite properties, and that's for a reason, because they're more appealing to people. If anyone has any symptoms in the house, or the person moving in has any symptoms, then no one moves. Essentially, that's it. So you can't move someone into a house that's under lockdown or under quarantine. So it's a bit of common sense, but people are moving. People do need to move. You can do something about it. And if your agents are telling you, no, we can't do anything, that's not true. They can if they want to. And you can take matters into your own hand. And I would suggest that you do put ads out there yourself, answer the phones, take control. This is something that we always tell our clients to do anyway, is to take control of the property. Don't rely on the management agent, because especially with HMOs, it's not hands off, it's at a distance, but you've still got to take control and take the reins of your agents. Otherwise they'll start to they can take advantage or just take their eye off the ball. So challenge number 4.
Challenge number 4, yes. So challenge number 4, managing cash flow. So that's quite just to follow on, Matt, from what you were saying about managing taking control of the portfolio. It's really, really important that you micromanage your properties and your management agents right now to ensure that they are communicating with the tenants, that they are doing all they can to ensure that the tenants are safe, and that those that are struggling are aware of all the options that are available to them, like Matt has gone through a little while ago. So to keep your tenants paying, obviously we are reliant on tenant paying the rent for our income and to keep the bills paid. We pay all the bills in HMO. So if the tenants are stop paying the rent or can't pay the rent, then we still have to be able to manage all our own bills. So it's important to keep that cash flow moving. If your agent, or sorry, if you do have tenants that move out, then advertise the rooms yourself. It doesn't matter if you've got a management agent in place already. They're your rooms, they're your properties. Don't rely on the agents to do the job for you. If they can fill them, fine, well and good, that's really great. And like Matt said, we've had a couple of tenants that have moved in who are key workers in some of our Midlands and the Northwest properties, or properties in the Northwest rather. So you know, their tenants are still moving. The market is slow and not many people are moving around, but it still is possible. So just keep on Spare Room, a Rightmove, or whatever, wherever you advertise for your rooms, to ensure that you're maximizing that advantage. Get another source of income. So again, the same as as your tenants, we've got a lot of time now where perhaps if you're self-employed, you might not be working as much as you were, or you might have been furloughed, or whatever it might be. Look for another job, whether that's a delivery driver, working for hospitals, working for care providers, that type of thing. There is an option there for you to do that. Just to make sure that you've got income coming through and cash flow keeps flowing, basically. Another thing that we can do is just go through your expenses and delete or cancel anything that you are not using. So for example, that gym membership that you've been paying for but not using, cancel it. If you've got Netflix, Now TV and Amazon Prime or whatever it might be, cancel them. Reduce your outgoings as much as you can. To do a direct debit audit and just be severe with it. Get rid of all the non-essential items, so that your expenses are a lot less than what they are, or will be a lot less than what they are now. As Michael has mentioned earlier as well, there are options of deferred payments on your mortgages, loans, credit cards, etc. Do that if you think it is something that you really need to do. But I'll say Michael's already gone over that, so I won't focus on that too much. You can also speak to your local council and see if you can defer your council tax payments until things are back up and running. And a lot of councils are offering that facility as well. Sounds simple. Turn the heating off. We're in the early stages of summer. The weather has been really good. So just turn that heating off or turn it down to a minimum so you're not spending where it's not necessary. If you're cold, put on a jumper. It's just doing what we can really to just make sure that we are reducing all the non-essential expenses to protect that cash flow. And it's, like I said before, it's not going to last forever. Mortgage holiday, so it's a 3-month deferment payment. I don't like the term holiday personally, because you will have to pay that at some point. So it is lender specific. It's not all lenders are offering it. So just be careful and just make sure that you're managing your cash flow, because if you can't take a mortgage holiday, if your lender doesn't offer it to you, then you still need to be able to pay that, or you could get into arrears with that. And at the end of the day, it'll be passed on to the tenants because the tenants are the ones that pay the mortgages and pay the bills through the rental income. There is also the bounce back loan scheme, which is basically a 6-year loan option from which the government is backing. So it's 100% backed from the government. So it's pretty much like a self-assessment application form that you fill in online. And it's the interest is 2.5%. Loan term is up to 6 years, and you pay nothing for the first 12 months of the loan term. So it can be a cheaper way of borrowing money if you are in need of some assistance, of some help, and haven't been eligible for any other support or assistance that has been out there up until this point. But again, like anything, speak to financial advisors, speak to people in your network, and take legal advice on whether you should or shouldn't take this, because everyone's circumstances is different. And you don't want to be caught out doing something that perhaps might come back and bite you in the bum in the future. Yeah, so it's and the loan is based on 25% of the 2019 turnover. If your company was set up after that point, after 2019. So it would be based on the projected turnover for the company. But again, like I say, seek financial advice, speak to a professional before making any applications if you're not sure about what you should do. So Matt has got a cash flow management sheet here, which I'm going to let him explain a little bit more. When it comes to spreadsheets, he is definitely the spreadsheet guy. So this is one benefit of having a business partner, is that if you're not good at everything, then hopefully the other person in the business is, and it definitely is the case here with spreadsheets. So I'm quite good at breaking them, and Matt's quite good at making them.
Yeah, so with this, because cash flow management is such an important thing, I just thought it would be good to offer you, if actually, would this be valuable? Maybe just pop in the chat box if you think a copy of this would be useful. Just maybe type a number 1 in the chat box, just so I can see, because we use a cash flow spreadsheet of monitoring our properties, our HMOs. This is very HMO specific actually, because it's got all your income and your outgoing expenditure, but also you can track the income that's due. Oh, let me go back. Track the income that's due per room. So it's every month you just get your rental statement, pop in your details, your income, your expenditure. So if you would like a copy of this is just a blank template that I've threw together. And we give this to our clients, but I'm very happy to give a copy out for nothing to you guys for being here this evening. So if you would like a copy, take our details at the end and just send us a note. But yeah, okay, brilliant. So it looks like there's quite a few people there that would be interested. So yeah, great. I'm glad that is of some use. You may already have systems in place. We do use accounts, so we use Xero to manage our accounts, but that doesn't give us the raw data like a spreadsheet like this would, in order to make decisions about when you've got money coming in. And the great thing about using a cash flow spreadsheet is that it really tells you, it shows you very black and white when you're going to run out of money. So if things continue the way they're continuing, you're going to run out of money in next month or 2 months time or 3 months time, and you can do something about it. So that's why we love a cash flow forecast, and we've got a finance director who we put this together with. So yeah, if you want this, do let us know and we will share it with you. So challenge number 5 is fear. So this was the fifth thing that people said, and it was just a random question we put on the survey, just to say, how afraid are you right now? And actually, it was one of the top 5 things. And think about fear is it's generally fear of the unknown, fear of what you can't control. And to be fair, we've talked about quite a lot of this stuff. If you sort your tenants out, make sure that they're paying, or you can help them to pay so you know the money's coming in the future, and you can take back control of what you can control, starting with yourself. You can then start to look at filling your voids, taking control of your agents, taking control of your cash flow, and don't just wing it every month going, I think I'm going to have enough money. You know down to the penny. We now know to the penny when we're going to run out of money. And so we are making sure that we are pushing that further into the future. Because there are certain things we don't know. We don't know when we're going to be able to refinance a property. We've got 3 properties under development. We've got other properties which have just been finished and due to refinance, which have all been paused. So we've got expenses, but also new money to come in. We don't know when it's going to come in. So we need to be aware of when cash is needed, so we can do something about it. And then if you do all of these things, then your fear will disappear. And then you can start to think about what the next level looks like for you. So I would say start to survive right now, then thinking about how you can thrive in the future. But it's okay to be afraid from time to time. So just pull together a few quotes. I did this for Niall's benefit because he loves quotes. He reads them in his miracle morning. It's okay to be afraid from time to time. I'll just pick out a couple. Laughter is poison to fear. So you have to remember to have fun. So Niall and I, we like to have fun. And we have our own beer, actually. It's sitting in Brighton at the moment, Scott Baker Brew. You guys are all going to be welcome to come and have a big party because it goes off in October. So we've got 700 cans of Scott Baker Brew, which we normally give out at events. Obviously, we've had no in-person events, so yeah, come and get some free beer. Too many people are thinking of security instead of opportunity. They seem to be more afraid of life than death. I quite like that one. And I think a lot of people are thinking about the mortality right now. So that's if you constantly think about doing this, obviously we need to do a bit of that, but we need to be thinking about the future as well. Curiosity will conquer fear even more than bravery will. Is a good one. I quite like this one though. Avoiding danger is no safer in the long run than outright exposure. The fearful are caught as often as the bold. So sometimes you think, what's the worst that can happen? Because actually the worst can happen anyway. And this is one of my favorite quotes at the moment. It'll be all right in the end. And if it's not all right, it's not the end. That's my other one I quite like. Okay, so moving on. Why do we do what we do? Well, we have a greater mission. We always like to share our mission when we speak. So we believe that there is an incredible power that comes at the intersection where property development, where you're creating money, meets the creation of communities that live in harmony. So we're very passionate about creating communities of people that live together. And that's really coming into its own in this environment right now with our HMOs and what we can see with the properties that we have developed and that we look to develop in the future.
Yeah, the second mission is all about community for us. So we want to ensure that all demographics of tenant have the right to the same safe standard of housing. So we've told you so far about the next level HMOs that we've been working on, but we're also working on social housing strategies and providing properties for our houses for people that are perhaps in need of care or that type of need really.
We also collaborate a lot. We work with investors for a lot of the portfolio that we have, and we make sure that we communicate with them because we want to make sure we provide a 5-star service for those investors that we're collaborating with, following our values of honesty and integrity, reliability and performance communications, and security.
Yes, and the last, but by no means least, we create financial choice and grow profitable portfolios for our clients who are landlords and need a leg up to the next level. So it's just, again, we like helping people. As I mentioned earlier, I'm a people's person, or at least I consider myself to be. So helping other people and seeing other landlords succeed and achieve their goals and achieve their dreams is quite important to both Matt and myself.
And a big thing that we do, we have aligned our business to the UN Global Goals. I don't know whether you know about these. This is a global effort to start to work on solving the biggest problems out there. And there are 17 global goals, and we've picked 2 which really resonate with our business. I think there are others as well that resonate with us. But the 2 that we realign with for the business are number 8 and number 11. So number 8 is where we have decent work and economic growth. So that's we're very much big believers of the creating business, creating wealth within a business can really then obviously that pays back over the long term. So helping people to grow businesses is important to us. And then other one is number 11, sustainable cities and communities. So making sure that everything that we do is sustainable, that it creates a community. And I think that shows in the co-living style of properties that we do. So a challenge for you guys that are watching, because it's not just about listening to us go on about stuff, is to maybe have a look at this. I'll give you maybe 10, 20 seconds and look at each of these and just think which one of these really resonates to you. And if you don't know much about the UN Global Goals, Google them, go and onto their website, because there are at least 5 or 6 sub-goals within each of these. So pick one of these, and because I think if you can apply what you do to your business, if you can pick something and make a wider difference. So what we do, for example, we work with a charity called the Clock Tower Sanctuary. They're based down in Brighton, and they help young people get off the street. So they help to prevent homelessness. And that's something that really fits our boxes, because it's helping people that are in need, and it's working within the community. So I think it's really important for us as we grow our business. So we're working within these frameworks that a lot of other good businesses are doing. So now what? We talked a bit about those problems. Now we're looking at what's happening in the market out there, and I'm going to do what Niall doesn't like doing and look at some graphs and some pretty pictures, and some of you will love this because we're looking at some statistics, some stuff that some people much cleverer than me has put together, and I've just picked out the salient points. But what is happening right now in the market? Transaction volumes are down, which means that basically there are very few people buying and selling. Michael alluded to it earlier, quite a lot of transactions going through auctions. I'm not sure I like that personally, because if I can't go and view the property or see the inside or get a survey done, I think there's quite a lot of risk to take on board. But in the same vein, if you're doing it and you're spreading your risk, so maybe not just buying one thing and putting all your eggs in one basket, if you went and bought 10 properties at auction, maybe 1 or 2 of them might be duds, which you can fix up and sell and maybe make a small loss on them. But then the other 8 will be really corkers. And you could probably get some deals, because people like me will say, well, I'm not sure that I really want to take that risk. I'd much prefer to know what's going on with the property. So transaction volumes are down. Banks have lowered their loan to value with a risk appetite, but Michael's explained all about that. There is a rising unemployment because of people being out of work, but interest rates are at their lowest ever, 0.1%, which is pretty amazing. So banks can borrow at really low rates at the moment. So I'd be quite interested to hear Michael's opinion on what interest rates are going to do over the next 6 to 12 months. So maybe once we finish, if he's still there, we can ask that question. But that's what's happening out there in the market. So what's likely to happen? Well, I got some information from Savills and an economic think tank, Oxford Economics, and there's generally a consensus out there that we're going to have a recession, because a recession is 2 quarters of negative growth. So that's pretty much guaranteed to happen. So we're going to have a rapid down in Q2, which we're in right now. So from April through to June, April, May, and June, we're going to basically, output is going to be a huge drop. I think it's something probably unprecedented. But then we're going to have a return to growth by Q4, or maybe Q1 next year. So we'll have a negative growth, and then we'll have a small growth again. So it's going to be a V-shaped recession. The time frame of it, as I said, is open to debate. But the thing is, over the long term, if you look at the average growth of the economy, we don't really expect to see a net loss over that 5-year period. In a longer recession, like 2008, you would expect to see maybe a loss over an extended period. But actually, when it comes to right now, what the experts are saying is that we're not really expected to lose much over the long term. This is a short-term thing, but obviously there's some assumptions made there. There's probably an assumption that there's not going to be a second wave of it. There's an assumption that we can deal with it, and I think that if the UK pulls together, we will. And I'm very hopeful and optimistic about the way that we can work within a world with COVID-19 and a world with coronavirus until we get things as vaccines. So with terms of property, what we're expecting is that property transactions are going to be 20 to 40% below the 5-year average until September. So actually what I mean by that, I've kind of explained that wrong. It's going to be 20 to 40% of the 5-year average. So actually that's a 60 to 80% drop in transactions until September. That's a huge drop in transactions. That's obviously going to have an impact on property prices, but not a huge one is what we're expecting. But by the beginning of next year, we're expecting transactions to pick back up again because properties are being transacted. My future mother-in-law is selling and buying a house at the moment. It is going through very painstakingly slowly because of solicitors. But yeah, these things are happening. And then by May next year, so in a year's time from now, there's an expectation that we will be back to normal, back to where we were at the beginning of this year. And then because of this this lull in the market, because it's something which is really external to the market. It's not a fundamental financial crash like in 2008 where banks just run out of money. That's not the case here. There's an expectation we'll get back to a sense of normality, and people will want to then buy. They will stop buying now, but sentiment will be that in a year's time they'll start to think, right, I want to buy now, and there'll be a surge in demand. So actually by 2022 there's an expectation that we will have higher prices. So to start a development now and sell it in 2022 is probably a really good thing to do, because you're going to be riding an upward wave. Probably these are forecasts, and you can never, you don't necessarily rely on forecasts, but this gives you an indication that if you're buying cheap, you buy well now, then you can come out the other side and then ride that upward wave as almost like an elastic band. It's coming down, a reverse elastic band. That's a bad analogy actually, because you pull it down slowly and you ping it up really fast. It's kind of the other way. You kind of, it's pinging down slowly, then coming up really fast. Maybe like a roller coaster. That's probably a better analogy. It's coming down really fast, then going up really slowly. There we go. I like that one. So here's some information that I've borrowed from Savills. Apologies for the blurry nature of it. This is the best resolution I could get. But if we just have a look at what's happening, these numbers relate to crashes in the market. 91 crash was there, and the 2008 crash one we remember the most. And then at the moment, we are, before the COVID, we were on the way down anyway, because there was something called Brexit. And I don't know whether anyone's forgotten what Brexit is. 6 weeks ago, we probably talked about Brexit. It was still something we talked about. But remember, at the end of this year, we're probably going to leave the EU. And are we probably less or more likely to leave with or without a deal? And I think we're probably going to leave, and there's probably not going to be a deal at this stage. But I think people probably are not that fussed about that, because coronavirus is, there will be ways to sort it. But they may well sort a deal. I don't know, maybe that's... but I'm optimistic of the outlook, regardless of whether there's a deal or no deal. But here we can see that there's going to be massive negative growth, and then we're going to have these GDP spikes in 2022, and then settling back down to where we normally see about the 2% per year, which is where we quite like things to be. And real house price growth is this red line. As we can see, house prices were coming down anyway. So there will probably be a little down again, and then we'll see a resurgence back in 2022. So that's one. And then this one, this looks at affordability. Because house prices were coming down in price anyway, they're becoming more affordable. And because interest rates are coming down, the interest payments are becoming more affordable, which means that actually there's going to be a real want for people, first-time buyers especially, and people trading up, are going to be wanting to buy properties. They're going to be wanting to moving on the ladder. So you can see why there's going to be a surge in demand, because of how cheap it is to borrow and how affordable those payments are. Over a long mortgage, a residential mortgage, which is what drives the mortgage market, the buy-to-let mortgage is a very small percentage of it. If you're at networking events, you're probably all just thinking about the buy-to-let market. We're still the small minority of transactions out there. It's still the big residential buyers, people that are buying and selling houses to live in, that drives the market and drives the prices. So that's really interesting. So what's likely to happen and going up? Well, I think rent will continue to rise gradually as demand outstrips supply. That's not going to change. We're not going to suddenly fix the housing shortage. Tenants' rights. We've seen a change in tenants' rights. Straight away, the government brought in rules that we can't evict tenants. And that was something that did come up on our survey. It wasn't high up on the survey, but people were worried about not being able to evict problem tenants. However, the government was talking about bringing forward the end of Section 21, which is that no-fault eviction. And I believe that I wouldn't be surprised if we've already seen the end of Section 21. Because if they're going to bring it forward, they may just roll it into what we've got now. So that actually you cannot evict a tenant under Section 21, only under Section 8, so when they break their agreement. But if the British government, so in England, the rules are different in Scotland. In Scotland, they've had, you haven't been able to evict someone for no fault for quite a while now. I've mentored people in Scotland, and we've got a couple of properties up there, and you're very picky about who you choose as a tenant, because it's hard to get them out, should you want to or choose to. But if they break their tenancy agreement and they don't pay, then the process of doing it is actually then quite straightforward. They have a tribunal. You just go, you present your evidence, and then it's done and dusted. It's a lot easier than going through the courts here, because we've had to evict a tenant before. Absolute pain in the backside. If you want to know more about that, come to Brighton Property Meet and buy me a beer, and I'll give you a lot of cans of Scott Baker Brew. So,
might take more than one beer.
You can take more than one beer. Okay. And here's some stuff that I've just taken from Rightmove. This information is updated by these big places. I just go and have a look on Rightmove once a month and see what the trends are, what's happening. As you can see, rents are rising in most areas. Annual change of 1.2, 1.1, 3.5, 4.9 in the northwest. We're happy about that. Wales, 6.9% increase in rents. Rents are going to go up. As landlords, I think we're in a pretty secure position. Because we're HMO specialists, what's next for HMOs, Niall?
Yeah, so I think like you were saying, there's going to be an increased demand. So for HMO rooms, I think there will be a higher demand for better quality rooms. We've all seen recently where everybody is trying to remain social distancing from each other. They're trying to be more hygienic, washing your hands more often, etc. So higher quality rooms, ensuite rooms, perhaps like rooms where you can pretty much live in without having the need to integrate or socialize with the other people in the property. So that's again increased demand for self-contained facilities. So for example, like I say, having en suites in there, perhaps like a pot noodle station, as someone referred them to before. So someplace that they can maybe have a microwave and a kettle and that type of thing in the room. Social and community aspect of houses has changed for the better. So people are living more interactively in HMOs than they were before. I think we found a statistic a few months back that how young people were more lonely now than they'd ever been before, despite the fact that we have more facilities and the ability to connect with each other more than ever. We were, I guess, spending more time on our phones and on our laptops than we were actually speaking to people, but that is changing, and it's changed for the better in our view as well. So we truly believe that the demand for co-living, next level HMOs will truly rise. So the need for people to be able to have or live in properties where they'll have a community feel. So I'm sure most of you are aware of how co-working environments work or operate, in where people work from all different businesses and walks of life can all congregate and work in the same environment, either as hot desking or having a rented office in that building. And we think that the co-living is a similar concept. So people live together from all walks of life, but creating communities within the property. So they socialize, they can watch movies, they can watch football, they can go out together, that type of thing. So we're encouraging those types of communities to help build longer term tenants. And that's what we refer to as our next level HMOs. So a next level HMO is basically a design-led property where tenants love to live. So it's a community feeling. They've got a family home. So it's not just renting a room in a shared house. For our investors, it's a deal for them that provides a high return and high cash flow. So we do work with private individuals and sophisticated investors who get a fixed return on their investment throughout the term that they have their investment with us. And obviously that is much more, so that's becoming more and more popular due to the fact of the decreasing interest rates in the bank. It's a property that it benefits from economies of scale. So basically, just because you've got 10 bedrooms or 15 bedrooms in a house doesn't mean that it's going to be 5 or 10 times more expensive to run than a 5-bedroom HMO. It's not going to be much more expensive to have 7 people and then 6 people. It's just one extra person. So it doesn't cost that much more. A good example of that is we've got the 22-bedroom HMO in Stockport, and we've got a leased line for the broadband into that property, and all 22 tenants are being serviced for £100 a month on their broadband. So if you compare that to like a 5 or 6 bedroom HMO, you're looking at maybe 30–40 pounds a month. So it doesn't, its economies of scale really benefit properties of that size. Like I said, we have the 22 bedroom, but a next level HMO is a property which is 7+ bedrooms. So you're looking at commercial financing, you're looking at bigger properties, and sui generis planning as well, for those of you that are aware of that. Or you can create do a commercial conversion where you create cluster flats. Again, that's going back to what our 22 bedroom in Stockport is. So it's 22 bedrooms, but split over 7 flats. So if you want to find out a bit more about that, maybe have a chat with us. But it is basically where we've created a HMO, a next level HMO, and created that community feel, created that community spirit within the property. But 22 people are not living and using the same kitchen and using the same living room. So that's basically a broad brush effect or detail of what we call next level HMOs.
Cool, thanks, Niall. And yeah, whenever we do a property, we follow a system called the tenant first model. And I think the reason that we do this is because the tenant is the most important thing. If you put the tenant at the heart of everything you do, and I think a lot of what we talked about tonight has been about communication and getting things right for your tenant. If you get things right for your tenant, they will stay in your property and they will pay you. And they'll probably pay you a premium as well for when you create really nice properties. So, we do that. We just follow a system that we do called our tenant first model. And then just finally, how can we help? Because we know there's very challenging times out there at the moment. So we've created something called a Survive and Thrive surgery. So you can have a Survive and Thrive call, and throughout the call, we'll identify what in your portfolio needs work and where you can look to make some gains. You can book in straight away and get a second opinion of what's working and what's not. If you're an existing landlord, then we'll pop a link in the chat box towards the end, and we'll pretty much finished now. And you can click the link to get given the option of myself or Niall to have a chat with, and then you can book it straight into our diaries. And it's basically just a free call. We're aiming to help you. And just to kind of wrap up tonight, just thank you for having us. But our aim is to be known for creating epic homes and for working with others that create epic homes for the co-living homes for the UK that give peace of mind and choices to the owner. Because there is a way to buy properties that can give you and your tenants lifelong well-being. And because actually, what's the point in being boring when you can just be brilliant? So thank you very much for listening.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Niall, and to Matt. We've just got a few questions, Rob. Would you like me to call those out?
Yes, please, Jane.
Okay, so the first question that came up was from Andy Arter. What strategy do you think could be most prevalent for you others this coming year?
No, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, I think we've probably answered that as we're going through, but we believe that next level or HMOs are still going to be very popular. There's going to be a demand for next level, higher end HMOs. So we're seeing that a lot of because people are wanting to live more in communities. I think there's a need for that. Perhaps it depends on as well what your strategy is. So if you're looking for capital, if you need money, if you need to raise finance, then perhaps some kind of flip type property strategy as well could work, where you buy, refurb, sell. There's a potential that we might be able to get properties cheaper after lockdown than before. And as Matt showed, that the property prices were coming down anyway. So there's a potential it could drop even further and then come back up again. So you've got the potential for uplift in value with those. Lots of things you can do under permitted development, even to add square footage, or add floor space to the property, which will automatically increase the value of it in general anyway.
Just to add to that, yeah, yes, what strategy would be prevalent to us? We are continuing with, we're not quite business as usual, but with the types of properties that we were creating before, and just being very mindful about the social distancing, and that's going to be around for quite a while. But if we buy a property now, it's not going to be probably created and finished for 6 to 12 months. So by then it'll be, you know, the market will be different, and we'll be, as we imagine, we'll be back to being something quite strong. So yeah.
Thank you. And just going on, actually, Paul says HMOs, because you talked about larger HMOs and being economies of scale, etc. But Paul wonders whether he's always been told that they're far more difficult to keep fully tenanted. He says over 6 beds, he would say. How do you manage yours that are sort of 22 beds?
Demand. Yeah. And it's we refer to the tenant first model, that we look at the tenants first. So if we wouldn't buy a property, or we wouldn't create a HMO that was over 6 bedrooms in an area where there isn't a demand for it. So yes, he's probably right. In certain areas, bigger HMOs would struggle, or HMOs in general might be difficult to fill. But we're quite, I guess, quite specific about where we put them, and the location of the property, the number of people that are living in the town, the amount of employment that's around, that type of thing. If there's a high demand for your product, then we produce that product. If there's not enough demand, then we wouldn't produce it. So he's probably right in some areas, but it's not a blanket approach.
And I think whenever we appraise a deal, we'll always allow for turnover of tenant, and each area will have a specific tenant type, and so we know that in one town we can get a tenant to stay on average 12 months. In another town it'll be on average 9 to 10 months, and that's generally due to the type of tenants and why they're moving. So if we're attracting young professionals, quite often you might attract graduates on graduate schemes, and they will be moving around the country, so they're only ever going to stay with you 6 months because their graduate scheme is dotting them around. So we've got a couple of properties that are in areas where that happens. But yeah, our average tenancy at the moment is probably around about 11, 12 months. Yeah. So they stay a decent amount of time in these types of properties. The turnover is not as high. And if the turnover is not as high, then your property's full. You know, if you've got 7 beds, 8 beds, as long as you've designed it right and you've got the really good facilities. So for example, you know, a 10-bed HMO, so, we know through our surveying of tenants and landlords that tenants like to live in clusters of between 3 and 4. So if you've got an 8-bed HMO, I would suggest that it's highly preferable to have, you can maybe have one large kitchen, but maybe a couple of breakout areas where people can commune and hang out, so that you've got those 2 clusters of 3 or 4 people can hang out together. But generally we will only ever do bedrooms that are living bedrooms, so that people can hang out by themselves in the bedroom if they want to. They could even have a guest in there sitting and watching telly. So these are nice properties, which is why, you know, whether a property's got 7, 8, 9 people in doesn't really bother us, because we'll have done that work and factored in some turnover for tenants.
Okay. Thank you. And also Gavin says, what would you say is your biggest challenge when you moved into development, and how did you overcome that challenge? So I presume that is when you moved up to the bigger units.
Oh, picking one.
Yeah. Yeah, pick and choose. I think, well, I guess like with anything, with every development, every project we've done, something will always pop up that you were not expecting. I guess perhaps a big challenge in one of the projects was the building control company that we were working with went bankrupt halfway through. So when that happens, you're not allowed to instruct another company. You have to go to the council. And that was quite a slow, painful process, and is still not done.
Still not resolved.
So that added about, to a large development, that added about 6 months, 5-6 months extra.
6 months extra.
And the finance as with it, probably about 20,000-30,000 pounds.
So you gotta, so the learnings from it, we did build in contingency, but we've hit that now. Corona has added to go over that contingency. So we'll look at options at the end of it. Still a really good development, still a really good project. But I think when the world changes, you need to look at everything and just be flexible. So that was a big challenge, but that was massively out of our control. And the council, unfortunately, are massively out of our control as well. Anyone who's dealt with planning permission or council building control will know that. That's a big challenge. And then finding good people. So it would be another big challenge. And we move into larger developments, finding good builders that are reliable all the time. And we've worked with a lot of builders, and when we've got a good one, we grab hold of them and we keep them. But even a good builder, you need to keep on top of them, because they're only as good as their last project, and they're not guaranteed to perform the best on the next one. So we've had that with 2 builders that have been great, and then all of a sudden they go off the boil for whatever reason. They've grown too big, they'd lost the project manager that worked with them that was actually the good part of their team. So just keep on top of it. I think that probably answers your question. I hope so.
Yeah, I think so. Thank you. And an earlier question was from Ali. This was, what is the best way to access property investors now if I'm deal sourcing? So I'm not sure if who would like to answer that.
I'll just jump in if that's all right to start with, and I'll pass over. Right now is a good way to access property investors. How many of the people in the room have you spoken to? So we've been sitting here for 2 hours, and I don't know whether you know on Zoom, but you can actually chat to anybody in the room. So you could have introduced yourself, said what you do, and had a couple of conversations whilst listening to the 3 of us talking. So now is a really good opportunity. So I would suggest do that and connect with the people that are in the room. Go to other networking events that are online and do the same thing. And I'm just really impressed because we did a presentation. Actually, Niall and I attended a networking event, and I sat on Zoom. I sat there, watched it, took notes, and then I learned afterwards that Niall, speed networker, what had you done? How many appointments did you set up in about an hour?
I had about a half a dozen contacts from the Zoom meetings, the webinar that we had attended, and arranged telephone calls with all the people after it. So there was a lady on there who was a LinkedIn specialist. There was another guy who was a finance expert. So I just started connecting and speaking to people. So if you are doing these type of networking events, then network, speak to people. And I think as well as networking, getting online and being more active on social media, telling people what you're doing, helping people. If people have questions that you can answer on all the property forums and all the property groups, then just help people as much as you can, and your name will become more popular and recognized then as that expert.
Yep.
Great. Thank you both. It was just in the chat box here. Could you two put your actual contact details up? I know you've put a link in there for the surgery.
I think you have it on a slide, don't you, Matt, as well? You could share.
You did do, yeah.
I did. I've just written it in there. So
okay.
If you would like to have a chat with us, the best thing to do is to click on the link, and you just book in, and we'll just give you a call. I've put in there info@thehmoplatform.co.uk. If you email that tonight or tomorrow, we'll just email you back with that spreadsheet. Not a problem at all. And that's not an opt-in or anything. You literally just have that. So cool.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I see Ali's put his details in there now.
Well done. But also social media. If you're not on social media, there's plenty of groups where you can be networking. And if you spent all day on Facebook in a Facebook group, chatting to people, and not just going. So you say you saw Steel and Package in London. If you're looking to invest in London, please contact me. Don't put that out there first thing of all. Build a relationship first. So in this environment, obviously we talked about that. That's fine. But when you're in a Facebook group, chat to people, find out about them. Find out what they're doing, and then drop into conversation after a bit of back and forth. They will ask you what you do, and you can say, "Oh, I saw deals for time poor investors in London, and we achieve these types of results," and then you the right person's interest. But the best thing to do is to ask them about themselves first, rather than just going into a group and saying, "This is what I do," because most people won't respond to you.
Yes, building relationships, basically. Yeah, building trust.
Cool.
I'm not sure how we're doing for time, Rob. We do have one other question from Ua, and he did ask an earlier question, but I thought it had been covered. Do we have time, Rob? 9, is it 9:15?
Okay, can you hear me now? Yes, the unmute button wouldn't work. It's 9:15 now. Yes, we've got time. We've got one more question, was it? That's fine.
Ua. Don't know whether you guys are reading it, but Ua says, what is the distribution of your HMOs currently? Which areas therefore have fewer turnovers, and would you suggest an HMO strategy should focus on those low turnover areas post COVID-19? And his earlier question was that you suggest there'll be a higher demand in a few months' time. Where are those tenants now, and where will they come from? So
I guess there'll be higher demand in a few months' time because everybody's in lockdown at the moment and can't get out. They can't move. They can't do viewings, and they're restricted to what we can do right now. So the demand will increase when people start being able to socialize and get out and move around again. We've got properties in various locations. We've got Midlands, predominantly the Midlands and the Northwest was where we focused on initially. But now because our office and our main base is Brighton, we're focusing on the South Coast as well. So like Portsmouth and areas like that. What was the other bit of the question? Which areas have fewer turnovers, and would you suggest a HMO strategy should focus on the lower turnover areas? Do you mean turnover as in tenant turnover?
I think so.
So like I said earlier, we focus on areas where there's a high demand for tenants, not a low demand. So our turnover hasn't really been badly affected.
maybe he means turnover of tenants, i.e. Those that will stay for 11 to 12 months instead of sort of 6 months. I'm not sure.
That would be our strategy anyway, pre or post-COVID, is to only invest in areas where there's a high demand for tenants and a low turnover. And you will find that out. We've discovered that by following our own tenant first model that we've put into place and we use when we're sourcing properties. Yeah. I don't know if you have anything to add to that, Matt?
I just wanted to clarify on the higher demand. When I was talking about a surge in demand, that's in property purchasing. Just to clarify that I was, in terms of the late 21, 22, 22 surge in demand, that would be for property prices and for people wanting to buy properties. I think what Niall said about being a surge in demand for tenants, I think is true, because of people moving and people that have moved into maybe move back in with a friend or with family, when they get a job, they're going to move back out again. So you've had a whole bunch of people move in with families who will just move straight back out again as soon as they're able to. So there is going to be people moving, and we are expecting in a couple of our areas we're gearing up. This is why we're advertising, we're having video viewings, we're putting stuff into place to gear up to make sure that when these people start looking, that they come to us, because we do have empty rooms and we would like to fill them. so that's all you can do, is make sure that you're doing the right things now and building that pipeline of tenants, a pipeline of deals.
Yeah, I can imagine maybe some some kids that have been locked up with mum and dad, and that's really changed their mind. They felt it's been cheaper for ages, but hey, they need to get out now.
Well, yeah, exactly. It'd be cheaper for a few months, but save up to get out as quick as possible.
or maybe even the parents are going to pay to get rid of them.
Exactly.
I'll pay you rent for 12 months. Just off you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's worth more than my sanity. My sanity is worth more to me. Yes. Okay.
Okay then. Well, I think it's quite informative, eh, people? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michael, you still there?
Yes, yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, it's thank you very much, Michael. It was great.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Niall and Matt, that's fantastic. Well done. Thank you. I've got a couple of been scribbling notes here down as I've been going along. What we're going to do next, largely we don't know, do we? So it depends what the government does. The network, the whole online thing, I think is a positive step. It's got some advantages. You don't have to travel. I haven't got to travel home from Croydon now, as indeed a lot of people haven't, which is pretty good. It's obviously cheaper in your own home. I think the only negative side of it is that you don't get, I think Noel said it, networking in person, he described it as, which is something that is good. That's what we go. That's what we go for. Yeah, the beer. Yeah. I have an idea. I want to start a WhatsApp group for the meet. I know it's the first one. I'd like to start a WhatsApp group. So if anybody is interested and would like to be included on a WhatsApp group, if you just text me on 07776 770 550, which I put up earlier, and we can start it. I said about YPN is full of COVID-19 information. Could we have some feedback on them? Because it's my first one that I've done. Could we have some feedback from the people that are here and who are sitting outside that I can't actually see on the screen? Ali was one, Andy Arter was another. I'd be grateful. The Brighton party in October sounds good. I'll see you there.
Hopefully before October.
Yeah, you never know. I found that on my shelf. So I bought it. I can't remember when I bought it. I thought I do that occasionally. Buy something, think I'll read it one day. So I'll start reading that.
Good.
I'm going to do another online property meet, which will be on the 3rd of June. Details are to follow. I hope you enjoyed it tonight. And once again, thanks to my lovely assistant, Jane. Thanks to the speakers, Michael, Niall and Matt. And thank you to everyone who for attending and coming along.
Robin, thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
And
Thank you, Rob.
Unless there's anything else, I'll sign it off. Call it a day.
Thank you.
And go and have a cup of tea. Cheers.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
everybody.
Yeah.
Good night.
I'll speak to the speakers soon. And Jane. Cheers.
Cheers.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye all.